Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into African American Vernacular English, or AAVE. We're going to look at the hidden rules and the really complex grammar that shows us why linguists argue it's not broken English, but actually a complete and logical system all on its own. So let's just get right to the heart of it. This is the question that really frames the whole debate. When you hear a feature of AAV, are you hearing a mistake, what some people might call broken English? Or are you actually hearing a super consistent, rule-governed linguistic system doing its thing? On one side, you've got the common myth that AAV is just a bunch of slang, or maybe random errors, careless speech. But on the other side, that's the linguistic reality. It is a full-fledged vernacular with its own consistent grammar, deep cultural roots, and a really complex social status. And that's what we're going to unpack today. All right, so how can we prove AAV is rule-governed? Well, let's start with something you've probably heard a million times: sounds getting dropped from the ends of words. Now, it might sound totally random, but it actually follows a very, very precise logic. Believe it or not, every single English speaker simplifies consonant clusters at the end of words. Most of us say last night instead of really hitting that T in last night. So the standard rule is you can drop that final sound if the next word also starts with a consonant. AAVE doesn't break this rule at all. It just extends it. The sound can be dropped even when the next word starts with a vowel, like in phase access. See? It's a systematic expansion of a rule we all use, not an error. And here's the kicker. This is how we know it's systematic and not just careless. This data shows that speakers drop that final sound almost half as often when it actually has a grammatical job to do. So in the word missed, the T is just a sound, so it gets dropped pretty often. But in missed, that exact same T sound marks the past tense. Speakers subconsciously keep it way more often, which proves they're totally aware of the meaning these sounds carry. We see this exact same logic with the final S sound. There's this clear hierarchy of importance. The plural S, like in two cats, is almost never, ever deleted. Why? Because it's absolutely crucial for the meaning. The possessive S is next. But the third-person singular S in he works, that gets dropped all the time, because the word he already tells you everything you need to know. The S is grammatically redundant. It's efficient. Okay, so we've looked at sounds. Now let's jump over to grammar and look at a feature that really sounds like an error to a lot of people, but is actually governed by a super specific and elegant rule. You've definitely noticed the absence of is or are in some AAV sentences, right? Like, she's smart. Linguists call this copula deletion, but it is not random at all. It follows this incredibly precise pattern that's directly tied to a rule that already exists in standard English. The rule is actually remarkably simple. Wherever standard English can form a contraction, AAV allows for a full deletion. So you can say she's smart, which means in AAV you can say she's smart. But here's the proof in the pudding. In standard English, you can't contract the is at the end of a sentence, like he really is. You just can't say he really's. And because you can't contract it there, AAV speakers would never delete it either. You would never hear someone say he really smart. It follows the rule perfectly. And get this, in some ways, AAVE grammar can be even more nuanced than standard English. Just look at its aspectual system. It uses these really specific markers to describe how an action relates to time. A stressed been means something happened a long time ago. Done signals completion, and habitual be tells you that something happens regularly, like the office be closed on weekends. These are incredibly precise distinctions that standard English often needs a whole bunch of extra words to express. So, if AAV is so logical and so systematic, why on earth is it so often stigmatized? Well, the answer has a lot less to do with linguistics and a whole lot more to do with society, power, and identity. Think about it like this. Speakers are constantly navigating two different kinds of prestige. First, there's overt prestige. That's the status you get from dominant institutions, schools, the media, and it's tied to standard English. But then there's covert prestige, and that comes from inside the community. Using AAV signals loyalty, identity, solidarity. It shows you belong to the in-group in a way standard English just can't. And this all creates a dynamic called style shifting, where speakers are constantly and fluidly adjusting their speech for their audience. A speaker might use a lot of AAVE features with their friends to build that solidarity, but then shift closer to standard English when talking to, say, a teacher or a boss. This was actually proven in a famous study by the linguist William Labo. He found that young boys in Harlem who were really quiet in a formal interview setting became incredibly verbal and logical when they were just talking casually among themselves. Now, sometimes all this intense social pressure can lead to something really fascinating called hypercorrection. A speaker knows their vernacular is looked down on. They feel this pressure to speak properly, and in an effort to do so, they actually over-apply a rule they've learned. For instance, knowing they sometimes drop the S, they might add it where it doesn't belong, like I walks. This isn't an error of ignorance at all. It's actually an error of effort. This social pressure, it becomes most intense and honestly has the most serious consequences in our schools. This is where a fundamental misunderstanding of what AAVE is can create some major barriers to learning. You can see how this can create a really devastating negative feedback loop. A student comes to school and speaks using the logical, rule-governed grammar of their home and their community. A teacher, who doesn't understand those rules, misdiagnoses it as a learning disability or even as hostile behavior. This leads to constant correction, which in turn causes the student to just become silent and withdraw from participating in class. It's a heartbreaking cycle. This very conflict actually led to a landmark federal court case in Ann Arbor, Michigan, back in 1979. A judge ruled that the school's failure to recognize AAVE had literally created a language barrier for students. The court then ordered the district to use what we know about AAVE to help teachers more effectively teach standard English, basically treating it as a second dialect, not a deficient one.
And it's not just schools. Even parents' attitudes are really complex. Studies show parents often value AAVE for building that sense of community at home, but they reject it for school and for literacy, pushing their kids to master standard English. And why is that? Because of what one study called an acute awareness, that in our economic system, how you speak can be used as a tool for discrimination.
So, after all of this evidence, what's the crucial point we should be taking away from all this? Where does this leave us? Well, from a purely linguistic perspective, the conclusion is crystal clear. AAV isn't inferior or broken. It is equal. It is structured with mathematically predictable rules. It is complex with amazing features like its aspectual system that adds so much nuance. And it is valid, serving as a distinct dialect with immense social utility for the people who speak it.
And that leaves us with a final and really powerful thought to chew on. The science of linguistics is clear. All dialects are equally valid and rule-governed. So when we judge a way of speaking as bad or wrong, are we really judging the language itself? Or is that judgment just a metaphor for how society views its speakers?